Cool. Can you all hear me okay? So I'm Ed, the first of the three names to talk to you tonight, and I'm a designer at GDS. For anyone who doesn't know, the main thing we're known for doing is we produce gov.uk, which is kind of the main website for the British government, celebrating its 5th birthday today. So everybody else is back at the office having a bit of a party. So we make gov.uk, but one of the other things we do is we produce lots of guidance for the rest of government and kind of standardized components that other government services can use, or government services can use to work on gov.uk. So today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about building an accessible autocomplete, and like one of these components we worked on this year. This was a collaboration between the accessibility service manual and register teams. That's quite jargony. Accessibility not so jargony, everyone here should know about that. Service manuals basically are kind of patterns and guidance team, and registers is, I'm going to say, like a data team, so about how we make data consistent across different services. And looking at autocomplete, it really started with wanting to look about countries. So not a generic autocomplete, I'll come on to showing an autocomplete, but very specifically how we ask users about countries. And the reason is that because lots of services collect country information. So here's a couple of examples, like country of birth, country of residence, home address, picking a location. Lots of different reasons the government might need to ask users for a piece of information about a country. And when we started this, and still to some extent because we're still building it, it's a really common pattern, a really common thing we need to ask users for, but it's also really inconsistent, and every service is doing it differently. And some different ways that you can ask for country. So I'm going to talk through some of these and some of the ways that they're interesting. So first is a drop-down, go away notification. Drop-down, you list all the countries. This can be quite good. If I can go, I've got a list of what's good about it. What's not good is they're really hard to use. We have found for user research that particularly people with kind of low on the digital literacy scale, they can be really, really tricky to use and require quite high dexterity. But also means that if there's a really long list to go through, so if you're in a country down in the Y's and Z's, that can take a long time to go through. And perhaps you know the country in a different name, and it doesn't really support that. What can be good is it gives services consistent data. Users have to pick from that list, but it can be hard for them to use to get that. Another option is a free text box. So just an empty text box to let users type in the name as they know it. Arguably, this is kind of better for the user side. They can give us anything. But the downside then for services is they can give us anything. So example on the left is from a service, variations on how you might spell South Africa. And that's maybe fine if it's human reading it, but if a computer has to interpret that, or if it wants to be used by other government services, or you're maybe doing calculations based on that, that's not a usable thing and would require manual intervention by caseworkers to kind of fix that data or query with the user. So manual collection, inconsistent, can't be reused. And kind of the final main option for collecting country is to use what we call an autocomplete, or maybe a type ahead, which is where you let users type a few characters of the thing, and then you make suggestions to them. And that can be really good because you can do kind of things like supporting typos. You can let users type in maybe a slightly different name. You've not got the usability issues of drop-down, but services are getting consistent data. What has so far kind of mostly blocked government from using these is most of accessibility issues. That's like one of the main things. There are some really quite nice autocompletes on the market. jQuery has one. But for the most part, some of them are quite good for accessibility, but the majority aren't very good for accessibility. They're often missing alternate names, so they may have some of the kind of the country names you know, but if you've got alternate names or alternate spelling, they won't have them. And the important thing for government is, well, the important thing we want to change is that they use static data sets. So they have kind of a fixed notion of these are the countries, but actually the countries that exist change, and countries change their name. And an important thing for us is that we produce a thing that can be updated over time, so that when countries do change and come into existence, change their name, this is an accurate list of them. So one of the things we did on our road to kind of making this country autocomplete, I started off in very early days kind of doing kind of an audit. These are kind of the autocompletes we know, and I'm not going to call these acceptance criteria, but here's some of the features we need this to support. So some of the examples, like it's got basic search, like obviously it has to have that, typos, partials and strings, support synonyms. There's a whole load of different things we were kind of evaluating these existing autocompletes against. And I think the biggest question I had, and this is before working with a developer, was do you start with like the most accessible autocomplete, or do you start with the most full-featured? So there are some really good accessible autocompletes on kind of out there on the web, but often they were very, very minimal feature sets. They didn't let you support typos or do have any of the usability enhancements we might want for our kind of general user base. So there was a real question I had, which is like, which of these, do you go for a jQuery which has everything under the sun, or do you start with the thing that's most accessible? I basically don't know. One of the things we did, we surveyed lots of government services. So I don't know if you're able to read this, but like an example of 2 of our questions. So will your service need translated country pickers? And 50% have said no, 35.4% have said yes, they'll need it in Welsh, and the rest is some other languages. So that's kind of part of an indication to us, we will need our components at some point in time to support some form of translation. And the other one's like, do you need to let users pick countries that no longer exist? This is a thing that maybe a commercial country picker might not need to deal with. But if we're asking a user for what's the country they're born in, that could well be countries that are no longer in the current list of countries. So our broad aim, and then I'll kind of talk, we'll get on to Rob and Theo, make it easy for users to pick a country, let it be accessible, and that it use consistent and up-to-date data. I'm going to give a quick demo so you can kind of see what we're talking about. Hopefully this will just magically work if I touch it. Yeah. So basic things, you can type in United and you get United Kingdom. You can type in UK and you get United Kingdom. You can type in Great and you get United Kingdom. Scotland, there's an interesting mapping between, like, we've got the various countries that form United Kingdom. And in many cases, users will give us England or Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But actually what the service wants is United Kingdom. So we're looking at how we map that for them. Also things like typos. So here's an example. You can type in Great, that's fine. But we found many, many people will misspell Britain. That's just a really common misspelling, and we shouldn't kind of give them an error. We should try and support those users where we can. So we've tried to include typo detection, like for the most common typos for countries with a lot of users. And we also let users type the name they know. So the kind of example I often give is, we might know Germany by Germany, but people from Germany will call it Deutschland. So did it do it? Yeah. It did do it, OK. So people can type their local name for their country, which is an endonym. And I learned loads about countries that I never knew. Don't know what this one's going to be. France. That's meant to be skipping. Never mind. And just to kind of type in, this will maybe put aside, in doing this work for a country picker, we also then get an autocomplete kind of free out the other side. So that was kind of quite almost like half of our need in government is for country picking, but the other half will be for other types of usage. So like, what type of medical condition do you have? What's your familial relation to this other person? There's lots of other reasons we might need an autocomplete. And now I'm over to Theo.
All right, thanks, Ed. Ooh, microphone's on. All right. Howdy. So, hi everyone, I'm Theo, and I'm going to quickly chat to you about the technical side of building a component. Sorry, I talk too quickly sometimes. So I'm going to consciously try to slow down, but it might not happen. We'll see. So,
if I could do that.
Absolutely, yes. So anybody can do that. Anyway, so I was brought into the project with the task of building a country and territory autocomplete that uses data for the open register. So it showed me a spreadsheet, the one that you saw earlier, and we had some initial conversations about kind of what our expectations and names were for such a component. And we were on the same level. We agreed on a number of features that we wanted, stuff like typo, synonyms, progressive enhancement, mobile user experience. I'm talking too quickly. Out of the criteria, accessibility really stood out to me because I didn't know enough about how accessible the solutions available were and what barriers can appear for people with cognitive, motor, visual impairments. And I thought I'd investigate and document some of my findings. So I had to start somewhere, so I closed my eyes, turned on Voiceover, and went over some of the existing autocomplete solutions that Ed had previously found. So some of them, like Leonie Watson, she's a recognized accessibility consultant, had very important accessibility features that other autocompletes didn't. And as I was testing dozens of autocompletes, I started adding criteria to Ed's spreadsheet for which features are kind of crucial for accessibility. So even though I was only using a screen reader at this point, I was already, and only testing for visual access need, I was already kind of finding a useful way to filter between all of these existing solutions, and that's accessibility. So based on this, I had some chats with Leonie Watson, like I said earlier, and we ended up producing what we call a set of accessibility acceptance criteria for autocomplete. So you don't need to read this, it's very tiny text. I'm going to go over them individually later. What makes these criteria different is that they are concise and they do not specify which specific technology to use. So they are focused strictly on the user journey, describing results that are a product of multiple factors like markup or markup, browser, assistive technology, even the user's own skill level in using their browser or their assistive technology. So we use these to guide our implementation from very early on in the process. Now, I was up against a very tight deadline to produce a working demo, which incorporated like, live register data and territories and synonyms and a bunch of other things. So all the available options, I ended up picking a library called Core.js Typeahead, which uses jQuery underneath, which also contains some accessibility fixes from Home Office. So I already kind of had there some, a beaten path, which Home Office had already treaded, kind of. So while this was not the most accessible autocompletes out of the ones which I had already tested, it had kind of a good foundation from some other perspectives like architecture, modularity, good test coverage, and so on, which allowed me to build on top of it. Given that Home Office, I already said this, so I made a number of prototypes using it, and then at this point, Richard Morton and the early Watson got more involved. So Richard Morton is an accessibility consultant. He works for GDS. He did a number of audits. While it did well on WCAG criteria, he found issues with assistive technologies such as JAWS, NVDA, or Dragon. Now, while I was building fixes, I shared my thoughts with Leonie Watson, who, like I said, is a respected accessibility consultant, and she's also a screen reader user, so she could actually provide first-hand feedback whether we were on the right track. And she provided, she told us things that we didn't even consider thinking about because we don't have that kind of paths as well-defined. So, in addition to our in-house testing, Alistair spoke to the Digital Accessibility Center, aka DAC, for an on-site review of our component, and I was kind of keen to fix all of the existing bugs that we had before we actually went to the DAC review. So I became a regular at our accessible laptops at GDS, where you can just pop down, well, it was down in the previous building, but anyway. You can just pop over to the accessibility team's desks and use laptops with pre-installed assistive tech on them, so JAWS and NVDA and all the good stuff. However, in spite of my best efforts, in using Core.js Typeahead, I was starting to hit some barriers which I couldn't really fix without fixing the underlying foundation of the component. I mean, given the fact that I already seen typeaheads and autocompletes on the web which had very good accessibility features, and I couldn't really replicate, and that was really frustrating for me. I was learning firsthand that tacking on accessibility at the end, especially with a battle-hardened 4-year-old code base, is tremendously hard and takes a lot of time. So I didn't make progress on one specific issue for 3 days, and I took a step back, and I thought to myself, hey, what if I spike building an accessible autocomplete from the ground up based on what I've already learned from studying existing solutions. So it took me a day to spike a component, and I was like, wow, it's done in a day, but then it took 2 months to productize it, software development, anyway. But I did end up with a solution that succeeded on most of the criteria that we had come up with until this point. And it proved that it was possible to have the best of both worlds. So as many of the accessibility features as possible, but also the right foundation for the rest of our features, like synonyms and things that Ed spoke to you about earlier. So I'd like to show you a demo of the same autocomplete that Ed showed you earlier. However, this time I'm going to be using Voiceover, a screen reader from macOS and iOS, and also like to show you how this relates to the accessibility criteria I went over earlier. Let's go.
Safari, location picker, public demo, window. What is your country of birth? Combo box. Type in 2 or more characters for results.
Right, so this is me tabbing into the autocomplete itself. I'll just go on this side so we don't get feedback. And you already see that it does a few things. So it's tabbable, it's focusable, it's telling the users that it's a combo box, and informing them up front that they need to type in 2 or more characters. You'll see that again in a second, by the way, if you missed it. So coming back to the accessibility criteria, numbers 1 through 6 kind of cover these behaviors now, such as being focusable, indicating when it has focus, indicating that it is an editable field, that it has a pre-filled value, that the autocomplete is available, and how to use the autocomplete. I went through that again just to make sure that if somebody's watching and they can't actually see the slide, they know what's going on. So apart from number 4, that all basically was shown in the previous slide. So let's move on by typing in the letter U.
U. Type in 2 or more characters for results.
So you'll notice that the autocomplete repeats the instructions from earlier. So this is bespoke. So this thing about typing in 2 or more characters is a bespoke behavior of auto and autocomplete. So it's crucial when you're doing things kind of off the beaten path, kind of which is potentially not covered by WCAG or ARIA, that you make sure the users are aware of whatever bespoke behavior you have. So let's type in the letter K.
K. 2 results are available. United Kingdom. 1 of 2 is selected.
So now see that some suggestions have appeared. This is relayed to the user using an ARIA live region. So relaying the exact number of matches being displayed is not important, but it's nice to have. Also, we have another bespoke behavior here, which is pre-selecting something on behalf of the user, which was the first option. So it's important to pass on this information too. So criteria number 8, inform the user when there are matches or if there are no matches. Number 9, optional, inform how many matches are available. Number 14, inform the user if a match is pre-selected. Again, these are criteria specific to autocomplete. Let's filter the results further by pressing the R key.
1 result is available. Ukraine. 1 of 1 is selected.
So pretty self-explanatory. If the number of matches changes, you should also relay that back to the user. So let's move on. Let's make a mistake.
Okay. No search results.
So coming back to criteria 8, you need to handle when there are no matches available. So for the user, if there are matches or if there are no matches. Now I'll just delete back to where I only have 2 matches. Show some other behaviors.
2 results are available. United Kingdom. 1 of 2 is selected.
And I'm going to press down arrow.
Ukraine. Text. 2 of 2.
So you'll notice that I've selected another item using my keyboard, but additionally, the autocomplete has informed me that a different match is now selected. Also, it's helpfully told me which number of match I'm on. So that's criteria 11, which is enable the user to navigate the available matches using touch or keyboard. And then 13 is also new here. Inform the user which number of, this is an optional criteria, which number of the currently selected matches. So 1 of 3, for example. Now let's see what happens when I arrow up 2 times.
United Kingdom. Text. 1 of 2. UK. What is your country of birth? Combo box.
So it moves focus back to the option before and then to the input field. And this behavior is kind of up for debate. Other autocompletes do it a bit differently, which is they loop you through the available options. So when you reach the top suggestions, it goes to the bottom. However, we found in user research that this was pretty okay to understand. So let's select UK again.
United Kingdom. Text. 1 of 2.
That was done with down arrow. And let's press tab.
You are currently on a text element. Inside continue. Button main 5 items.
So tab for our autocomplete will confirm the currently selected option and the regular browser behavior, which is move focus to the next element in the tab order. Now, we have another way of confirming a match, and that's pressing enter. And for that one, we do tell the user United Kingdom was selected. However, when you press tab, you don't get that. So that's kind of an example of something that we haven't yet got around to figure out a good way to do, and a criteria which autocomplete is failing. But anyway, that means there's still work to do. Now, if you're paying attention, yeah, I already said that, and that's the demo.
Voiceover off.
Right. We don't need that anymore, the mic. Still a demo. Thank you. Right, so one key thing I learned while building the autocomplete is that relying on good ARIA markup is not enough. You really need to test with all of these various screen readers, like it was mentioned earlier by Alison in his previous presentation, that's exponential complexity, much harder than browser testing. But if you don't, then you don't actually have a guarantee that what you're building will be accessible. And in the beginning, we found ourselves also speculating a lot about how do we expect our users to use the component, because we didn't have any real data on this. So we need to do user research, and that segues nicely into the next section from Rob, who's going to talk to you about user research.
Thank you. I want to start with a little homage to somebody at HMRC, the accessibility champion there, who is, I believe, Mr. Moore, Chris Moore. And he has a lovely analogy about being on the bus, about driving and building this momentum around getting people to understand what we should all be doing in terms of designing good user experiences in an inclusive way and getting everybody on the bus. This was my first time on the bus. When I started this project, I'd never done any user research, any testing with people with disabilities. It was a new world to me. And I think that's important to say right now in terms of the amount I learned from doing this, but also to, I don't know how many user researchers are out there in the audience who maybe you all have had experience working with people with disabilities, but it can, at times when you're doing something you haven't done before, it can feel quite daunting. And this was an incredibly stimulating experience for me, and I learned a hell of a lot. So, first thing, building momentum. So Ed Horsford, who spoke, he briefed me back in, it was back in January this year. He had conducted that survey he talked about where he had, it was a great survey that went out across government end of last year, asking service teams across government who have some type of a, asking for country details from their users to get in touch. So he gave me the results of that sheet, of that survey, when I started on this work. And the first thing I did was try and contact service teams across government to see who would be interested in collaborating with us to help us test this. And as you could probably imagine, most people were busy and wanted to have something that was kind of bulletproof before putting it into their own thing. So it kind of felt like it was up to us to develop it, test it, before actually engaging with a service team in that respect. So the second thing I did was I kind of had to consider how am I going to test this thing. So what I want to do now is just to show you the full spectrum of the testing that I did with Ed and Theo for the Autocomplete, which at the time we called Country Picker, I think. Because to be perfectly honest with you, the first thing I did was not test with people with disabilities. So the first thing I did was some pop-up testing, somewhere quite close to where we were. So I got in touch with the School of African and Oriental Studies, SOAS, in, oh, I beg your pardon, sorry, I was looking at this and I forgot it's one screen ahead, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, so I got in touch with these people. So they were just up the road in Holborn, and I hung out in the Student Union bar for an afternoon. There's a lot worse places you could go to. And I just asked people to have a go with our prototype. Now, the funny thing is, as you can imagine, all I had was this, that we just had this one single bit of functionality to test. It was not within a service or anything. There was no real context for it, which is quite a challenge for testing, which is why I felt pop-up testing was a good way to do this, because you get through a relatively high quantity of people quickly. So, as I said, the first thing I did was go to SOAS, sat in their bar, and just asked people to try using this both on the Mac and on our own device. I had an Android device I took in. And that was good, because I got through about 20 people in a couple of hours. We also conducted pop-up testing at Heathrow Airport, airside, thanks to another user researcher at Home Office, who's here tonight, Amy Everett, who got me in there. And we went to Merton Civic Centre in South London, where we tested it with people with low digital skills, where they run every Friday sessions for people who need help for filling out job applications and accessing technology to do that. So by about, let's see, started Jan, by about end of February, we had managed to test with close on to 60 people through the pop-up testing, just accosting people at Heathrow Airport airside who were just trying to snooze before getting on their planes, and prodding them and getting them to have a go, and Merton Civic Centre. And at this point, we contacted the Digital Accessibility Centre in Neath, in Wales, thanks to Alistair's introduction. And that was really kind of that was a key kind of turning point for this piece of work, because it was our first opportunity to really test this software directly with people who use assistive technologies. Now, I don't know how many of you know about the Digital Accessibility Centre, but what's so valuable about DAC, is what we call it, or we called it at GDS, is the fact that it's people with disabilities using the assisted technologies and testing the software themselves. But, you know, with the caveat, within a controlled environment. It's stuff they're kind of like super users, if you like, because they're doing this day in, day out, just reviewing both commercial, government software according to the assisted technologies and how well it performs. The day was tightly managed. We got through, I think we talked to 6 people, 6 or higher, more? Okay, more than 6, between 6 and 10 people. And each person, you know, was using a different type of assistive technology. So this person, for instance, was using Zoom text and Voiceover on his phone. And for example, what was interesting, this was the first person we spoke to, when he, as you can see, he has Zoom text. He had it right up the resolution of the screen. So he's just got that. He's also got it inverted. And when he typed in something like India, after India, you've got in brackets IN, and the screen reader software would go Indian. It didn't respect the parentheses around IN. He also he had some very good quotes that I'd like to give you, because he was very keen that we try and use plain English, overcomplicating something that does not need to be overcomplicated. I tend to navigate from the top left of the screen, as the logo banner is usually there and it orients me. The next person, who's a Dragon user, who had a lovely thick Welsh accent that again presented problems for her communicating with the Dragon software at times. I remember we asked her to try Wales, and it wrote W-H-E-L-S, wheels, yeah, wheels. And so things like this, you know, these are the kind of challenges that they're experiencing. Now this person was the first person we started testing with JAWS and NVDA with, and here he was like, why did you put the text field and suggestion box together? He didn't really understand the paradigm that we were playing with this autocomplete through what the screen reader was telling him, playing back to him, coupled with the fact that we had a bug that we discovered at this point, and the software wasn't doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing. We also tested it with 2 people who are dyslexic at DAC, who were very positive about it in terms of the way it forgave misspellings and corrected it and suggested the correct name, and one person who was autistic. But basically, we came away on the train back to London from Neath thinking, there's more work to be done here. We can't just, that's not enough. So what we did, because you know the experience had been invaluable, so we decided that we needed to test with people who had less knowledge of government services and assisted technologies, just some more kind of just normal people who did rely on assisted technologies, but are not using them day in, day out to review software like DAC does. Okay, so contextual research. I love contextual research. I think there's stuff that you learn when you go into somebody's home that you are never going to learn by meeting that person in a usability lab and sitting them down in your lab. And this is certainly true in this case. So what we wanted to do here was I wanted to test with people who had less knowledge, less experience of those government services. And we had decided that where we really wanted to focus our efforts was on screen reader technologies. So we briefed Juliet at Inclusite to find us people who use JAWS, NVDA, and Voiceover technologies. Also Dragon users, but unfortunately we did not get any in this round of testing. Now, we tested with 5 people within the M25 area of London, going to their homes. And as I say, this is what we had planned for. And interestingly, this is what we actually ended up, that's more what the kind of the whole range of technologies we found ourselves up against when we brought our software into their homes. And I think that's quite interesting because, you know, we had never come across within our design thinking this, for example, the Braille keyboard. And we had not, in fact, just the straight OS microphone, people talking names into the phone instead of actually spelling it as well, was something that we hadn't thought about. So now I just need to make sure I'm in sync with my Mac. Just give me a sec. This is going to be good. Okay, so here we are. So first thing, a quote from somebody who uses iOS. I use my phone to do a lot more things because it's easier to navigate. Just by pressing the home button, you can turn on VoiceOver or turn it off. So yes, Apple iOS provides instant access to VoiceOver software from the home screen. Another quote, because I'm using VoiceOver, it's easier. I can navigate it and it will tell me each section as I pass my fingers. It's telling me where to go. So there was a lot of very positive feedback of people using Apple VoiceOver for on their phone. Okay, is this going to work? Are you ready? Okay, here I go. So first bit of video content, just to give you, this is the iOS VoiceOver talking, just telling this user what's going on.
Except where otherwise stated. Open government license fee. All content is available. Open government license. Continue. What was the last country you visited? Combo box. Collapsed. Selected. Type in 2 or more characters for results.
Okay, did you hear that?
I didn't understand it. We heard.
Good, yes. And I guess that's the first thing. There's a whole spectrum and range of setups that people configure their screen reader software to work at, depending on how used they are to using this screen reader software, to the point where it is incredibly hard for somebody who's not used to this technology to follow what is being played back. The next one. Okay, so that kind of voice of what at the end was because, and it's just to emphasize one thing, as I said, we're just testing this one piece of functionality, no validation, nothing else. So it was somewhat abrupt, the end of the experience of what we were testing with people, and that's something that I think we took a learning from in terms of, well, one, we should probably be testing some type of validation flow as well, but two, is it really wise to be testing something in the abstract like this, or should we always try to be bedding it into some type of context, some type of experience, which is actually something we went on to do in the next thing we developed. The next one, now we're going over to desktop. So, you're not going to report that, but one thing I just want to, this was NVDA, and NVDA calls the autocomplete a read-only combo box, whilst JAWS, which we're now going to hear, it calls it a read-only edit. So one calls it a combo box, the other calls it just a read-only edit. And this again just was the element of some confusion, that discrepancy between how this type of a field is being called between the two main, one of these two main types of screen reader softwares. Again, apologies for the audio, that wasn't super clear, but thank you very much, Alistair. So I just want to finish off with some lessons learned. The first thing is and we've talked about it before, but we're going to talk about it again, integrate accessibility testing into all rounds of research. If we look at the timeline of the work that I was involved in, we began in January, and one big caveat, this wasn't a full-time thing. Theo, Ed and I were all working on other projects whilst doing this. I probably worked a total of between 10 and 15 full days on this entire project through conducting the pop-up testing at SOAS, Heathrow, going to DAC, Digital Accessibility Centre, Merton Civic Centre, and then doing the 5 days of contextual research at the end. Now, there were a couple of reasons why we ended up doing it like that. But I guess the main point I want to make is, if I look at that, that is not the way I think it should be. Because I think in an ideal world, if I was going to be doing this all over again, I'd probably be trying to make sure that I'm conducting some type of testing with people with disabilities all the way through. Because some of the learnings I think that we got, I think would inform the greater design. I'm not sure whether Ed and Theo would agree, or we could talk about that. But that's just something that I feel looking at that timeline. The second one is, I guess this is a question that we're also, I suggest we are always asking when we're doing any kind of design, whether we're limiting or empowering users. And it kind of goes back to a quote that one of the people in the contextual testing said. Often it's the same problem. You have to be definite about what language the website is going for. So you're kind of having to force people to write in a certain way. And one of the values of this autocomplete functionality is its ability to accept mistakes from the user, its capacity to forgive and correct, which is not to be belittled. Common ways of naming things saves people time and confusion. I mentioned that inconsistency between JAWS and NVDA. Most of the time we do appreciate little shortcuts that we get while navigating the web, especially government sites that are full of so much information, variations of different information, all that. You're grateful for anything that can help you skip out from all that and go straight to what you need to do. And again, I think that's just, it really encapsulates something that, GDS is striving to do through design patterns, common ways of doing things, but also in terms of ways we are constructing these pages for screen reader technology, in terms of signifying what the purpose of a page is at the get-go when the page loads, in terms of waiting for people to discover it further down the page. And then this one, so this one was pretty much about the fact that I've got a really nice piece of audio, but don't worry, we won't do it now. But the last session we did was with a person who was using their screen reader software. They had a friend watching TV in the adjoining room. So there was this competing sonic attention going on between what was going on the TV, what was going on the Voiceover screen reader software. And then obviously this person is trying to do a number of different things at once. So I think it's really, that's something that you just can't fully appreciate until you put yourself into that situation and consider how your design is impacting in terms of supporting that person, helping that person, or actually challenging them. And that's the audio, but I'll get rid of that. And I've already touched upon this. So yeah, I do think testing in the abstract risks confusion. It's asking the user, the research participant, to work harder to understand what you're asking them to do if you don't set it in more of a context, or you're having to do more explaining. So again, I think that's something to try and avoid. And I've talked about this one as well. So I think places like Digital Accessibility Centre are extremely important, but I think the ideal is combining using a place like the Digital Accessibility Centre, using the automated review software, but also doing some testing out of the lab with people on their own machines, in their own environments, because it provides you with insight you do not get from either of the other two modes of testing or research. And I think that's it. Okay, so happy, please do have a look at it, have a play, and yeah, thank you very much.
Hi Rob, I'm Ben, I'm from Keytree. So yeah, it was a research kind of orientated question. You exposed, and it was blatantly clear even for the, no, it's not you. It's just, it said garbled, what did it say? Garbled text. So whatever, whoever's controlling that or it's automated was trying to follow on to the screen reader text to voice. iOS or whatever. So you said that was obviously a challenge to try and keep up with users who are used to using screen readers that are working very, very hard, fast. So were you tempted at any point to ask them to sort of reset it, slow it down, or how did you follow when it was too fast? Was there anything you did to mitigate that?
Oh, okay. No. I didn't ask them. I don't think we ever asked them to slow it down. I mean, that wasn't our main our interest was to see how well they were able to use the software on their own terms. That was the reason we were there testing it. So the only time we did intervene was with the person who had a Braille keyboard, and we were testing the software with JAWS and NVDA, and it wasn't, the person was typing a country name, and it was not saying it wasn't giving any indication of how many countries were coming up. It just wasn't doing it. And we were like, shit, that's funny, it seemed to be working back at the office. And thankfully, due to Ed's persistence, he was like, can you just try unplugging the Braille keyboard? And he was like, no, that's got, but he did, and then it started to work. And it just highlighted the fact that it is that the first speaker today, Alistair, I beg your pardon, Alistair, sorry. The first speaker today, made the point much more eloquently than me, but it is incredibly hard to design for every scenario in this space. That Braille keyboard is something that we'd never come across before. It's a relatively small percentage of the population that use them. I'm not saying that's a justification for not having designed for it, but we hadn't, and we still have not. So that person, if he plugs his Braille keyboard back in, I believe that, what you call a bug, is still going to be present in the software. Possibly. Okay.
Thank you.
So what elements of testing would you recommend as the most crucial elements for an organisation with a much smaller budget and much less resource than, say, the likes of GDS?
Do you mean what types of testing? Or?
Yeah, the most crucial elements of testing in sort of all the broad spectrum of testing you did. What would be the most crucial aspects of it, you'd say, for an organisation with sort of less resource at its disposal?
Shall I get that?
Yeah.
You can. Yeah.
If you are doing user research, just make sure that you're including people with access needs in the people that you're doing research with. There are also organisations that can kind of do some assistive technology compatibility testing for you if you've got the budget. So there's a spectrum of things that you can do. There are some things like you wouldn't want to start the user research until you've run the automated tool. The user research is going to be the most expensive way to find the issue. So there's there's an order of things to do things. But just because you can't afford to spend as much time doing user research or that kind of thing doesn't mean that there aren't a load of things that you can do that will be very cost effective and find lots of things for you. Thank you. Yeah, cool. So we've actually in some of the guidance that we've got in the service manual, we've just kind of explained some of those things that you can do for testing and kind of the order to do them in, so that you may find that helpful. Oh.
Hi.
I think we've got a...
This genuinely excites me. What happens in the rare circumstance when something like JavaScript doesn't load?
Yep. So I can talk a bit about that. Progressive enhancement is a technique you can use to ensure that as much of your website works as possible in case of various things failing. That was kind of like a key design goal from the beginning of the autocomplete. So in this situation, when JavaScript doesn't work, you get a drop-down. You don't have any autocomplete functionality, no typos, no nothing like that, but you can still submit the form. You can still, it's as it was for most services without an autocomplete before, so.
A question over here.
Hey.
Oh. Can we have some sound over there?
Hello. Excellent. Hey, I'm Joe from Samsung Internet. I'm interested in the hows of the voiceover that you're doing. So does that entirely come with the elements that you're using, or are you using some special ARIA attributes to get those?
Right. So the question is specifically how we're getting that voiceover output. It's a combination of things. I encourage anybody who is handy at JavaScript to just look in the code base. But anyway, so for the available options, you have an ARIA live region set to the polite setting. Then for updating so when you update the number of available options, so like 2 to 3, and that's actually in the ARIA live region. But when I found that I had to find a way to actually get, if you update from the same number of options, so if it's 2 options and if it's 2 options again, the ARIA live region will not update, users will not hear anything. So what I actually do is I insert a comma at the end, which is like a hidden thing. And it's just one of the many kind of like hacks, if you want to call them, which the component contains. It's just you need to find a workaround to actually get to the crux of, it's what I was talking about when WCAG is potentially not all encompassing. I couldn't find a better solution cross-browser for that specific situation. Anyway, I'm not mad, it works. Anyway,
Nice.
That's just 2 examples. Like I said, I could go to length at it, but maybe, yeah, we can chat some more after, who knows.
Question in the middle? Oh, okay. And we'll have you next, sorry.
You said you had hi, I'm Matthew, I work at Whitbread. You said you had a reasonably small amount of data to match, but you are also trying to match like spelling mistakes and synonyms and things like that. So how much have you had to add to that initial data set to ensure that you can match these other things?
You can talk about that, maybe?
Yeah, so gathering the data has been kind of an interesting one. So the UK government maintains a register of countries, which I think we launched a year or 2 ago. So if you go to country.register.gov.uk, there's like a list of these are the countries that the UK government recognises. And that's like the first time we've done it kind of standard across government. Previously, lots of different departments had their own kind of ideas of which countries. To that, we've added synonyms, we've added endonyms, which are the local country names, and a few typos. That's a thing. It's the thing we need to do more work on to make sure that we've got the correct coverage. There is there's a downside of having too many extra names, that if we have lots and lots of different ones, the more things you type in, the more different countries that you weren't intending might come up. So there are certainly cases now where you type in something, a common country name, and a country you're not expecting comes up because a typo of that or the synonym of that could be that thing. So there's definitely a thing I think we've seen in usability testing, like finding. Sorry?
Egypt, I think, is an example.
What does Egypt do?
The official name is either contains Republic and if you type in REP, you get Egypt as a result, and you're like, that's weird, but don't quote me on that, might be wrong. Anyway, something along those lines.
There's definitely an interesting thing of balancing how many different.
Oh no, it was Myanmar.
Myanmar.
Yeah.
How many different things you support versus what we then return for users, and then returning it in a way, so lots of the official country names have Republic of. I think like fully 50 of them have Republic of. No, I was wrong. So there's an interesting thing what you then return when you give users back. We kind of want to let users type Republic of Egypt or whatever country is, but we also need to look at then what we play back to them so that it does make sense to them.
Hello, I'm Peter Abrahams from Bloor Research. I was just wondering how much you found out by your pop-up testing, how many things you found there and how many you had to wait until later testing to find out. And a second question is, you have autocomplete features in a lot of lots of browsers nowadays. Do you have the ability to include that as well? I mean, not for country of origin, that would not be reasonable, but in other similar situations, the autocomplete will be very useful.
Well, I'll take the first question. So the pop-up gave us a good understanding of I'd say like general usability issues for the autocomplete. At the time, it was a pretty early version of the prototype. We found on mobile, the mobile keyboard was obscuring parts of the interface. That was causing problems for users to scroll whilst that on-screen keyboard was on screen. It gave us some insight into how people were used to searching for their own country names in terms of how they use drop-downs and shortcuts, like pressing a key. Someone from Tajikistan told me that he'd just go straight to the T, pressing it to jump to where his country was around. So people find their own shortcuts to get to do what they want to do. I'm thinking, have you got anything else in mind that came out of it?
I don't think there were any specific accessibility findings from those, so much as general usability that would help guide how we designed the component.
Yeah. Do you want to say?
Seems to suggest you really ought to do that first, because if you don't fix the usability.
Well, that's why I might say it's slightly chicken and egg in the sense that at that point the software wasn't optimized for users with disabilities.
Yeah.
So it was too early to get really valuable insight from testing with those kinds of users at that point. But it is something that I believe you're right, that we should have been pushing to start the process of earlier. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, you were going to say something.
But also, there is that thing that you can spend loads of time making something that's not very usable really kind of technically accessible. That's nowhere near as good as kind of fixing all the usability stuff and making sure that that's accessible. And that's where it kind of comes to, the goal is not technical accessibility, the goal is something that is truly usable, that can be used by as many people as possible.
So I think I was very pro the way we did it with SOAS initially, because we might have found that autocompletes are completely unusable and people hate them. If that's one of our findings, we don't want to then invest all this time in building a thing and then making it accessible. So I think there's definitely like some general usability first, and then I would want to kind of look at, can that be made accessible?
Yeah.
So browsers often have a facility to do autocomplete, so you go into name or address and it will offer you autocomplete for all sorts of fields. And I'm just wondering, I mean, country of origin is not one that you would expect to have there, but town might be.
Yeah. So I think that's a bit of a different feature, where that if the browser is aware of your personal details, like name, first name, credit card details, and so on, they might fill in on web pages. When it comes to specifically a drop-down allowing you to filter available options, autocomplete in this sense, I believe Firefox, since one of the releases last spring, does have that kind of functionality, but it's not completely baked with everything that we wanted to try, like typos and endonyms and that type of stuff. So.
In terms of like fitting in users' previous data, I think that's something we leave for services to work out whether that makes sense for them. For there's whole load of sets of data where it probably doesn't make sense, or for services that are more likely to be used by people in libraries and shared computers who maybe don't want it filling in previous information. But it's something it's more for services to work out whether that makes sense for them.
Hello, my name is Vanya Sudar. I'm an accessibility consultant, independent accessibility consultant. I'm wondering, did you test on Android?
Yes.
Okay. So I wasn't really mentioned so far.
No, sorry, I just wanted to, not in the contextual research.
Okay.
The 5 people that we conducted contextual research, no Android users.
Would you consider it in future? I mean, I think it is important because there's still a significant amount of, well, for starters, blind people who I know for a fact that use Android myself. And I think it's really important because, well, there's a few of us who do use it, and most clients that I work with, we do test everything, including Android. So. Totally agree.
We did do manual testing on Android. So within GDS, we didn't do testing with user research participants, mostly because of the fact that it has, we had a limited amount of time slots with people, and it has a lower market share, frankly. When it comes to like screen reader users, TalkBack, but also because it was actually surprising. We didn't have that many questions about it. So Chrome on Android actually has fairly similar behavior to Chrome on desktop when it comes to screen reader usage. So the bugs that we did have there, we were like kind of, well, we already know about them. So we didn't expect to find many new issues from research. This is also why, or well, I'm not sure if I explicitly mentioned that at the time, but that was also why I didn't necessarily push for it as much.
Okay,
but
it's not
it has been tested, yes.
So, yeah, okay, thank you.
I think, yeah, and something I just emphasise is this is a first cut of this software. I can't remember, there is a phrase in GDS, I think, something around nothing's ever done. Is there? Or am I making it up? But anyway, I think it's important to iterate that in the sense that, I mean, yes, we've done this first cut, we've done what we've talked to you about, it's now on GitHub, people can use it, test it. We're hoping that people start using it in their services, across the government departments and elsewhere, and feed back the research. That's the only way this kind of stuff gets better. So yeah, I think that's important.
We've also kind of think, since releasing, we've had a lot of different bug reports and feedback through the GitHub page. So we get various departments and people even outside government who are using this, feeding back, oh, I found this incredibly weird quirk with scrolling, and then that's something we can look at, or also get contributions from outside government.
So I've got a quick question. Alistair was mentioning at the beginning of tonight about WCAG 2.1. I'm just interested, you've done a lot of user research as well and testing with users with disabilities. Did you notice how they map to the WCAG 2 or 2.1 success criteria, or did you take them into consideration? Just a quick question.
Yep. So I consulted the WCAG criteria as part of when I was looking over multiple autocomplete solutions. Now, if I specifically went back to map to them, no. But yeah, we did.
2.1?
Oh, no, sorry. This was about 2.1 specifically. Yeah. No, not 2.1. This was back in February, March. I'm not sure if the first release candidate was out.
I think
it was May.
I think for most things it's fine, but the 44 pixel criteria, I'm not sure, it might be slightly less than that.
Yeah, potentially.
Which
I think it's 40.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was a tough question.
Brilliant. Can I ask someone to give a massive round of applause? So thank you so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We've got the venue till 9:30, so there's plenty of time to network and chat, and there'll be drinks and things outside. We have, the clicker. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the next one, next event will be in November. Looks like it's going to be on November the 22nd back here. I have ideas for 2 talks. They're not fully confirmed yet. I will announce those as soon as they're confirmed. I will send out a survey again. If you can use that survey, let us know what you thought of tonight, any things that we could do to improve it. If there are talks you particularly want, if there are speakers that you particularly want, let me know, and I will do everything I can to get them to come and speak here. And last but not least, I just want to say a massive thank you to Barclays. This venue is astounding. What was really, really nice of having such a big venue is there wasn't anybody on the waiting list that couldn't get in. Basically, everybody that RSVP'd has managed to come. So I think we're going to try and keep using this venue. Thanks Barclays for the venue. They've been videoing it. They've provided the captions. They've provided a huge amount of support in kind of the name badges and registration and all that sort of thing. So please put your hands together and say a big thank you to Barclays. Thank you.